Welcome in. Hey there, Blackwood. Thanks for joining us. Hope all you awesome goblins and ghouls are out there having a pretty sick Friday. It's overcast here, but way warmer than the 30 degrees it was, so I'll take that. It's definitely been a while. Couldn't stream, couldn't function, couldn't do anything. But just kind of, survival mode or whatever. It happens to everyone. Life happens. Just kind of put me out of it for a month. I couldn't believe it when I went live that it said literally it was a month ago. So do feel a little guilty there because I did a lot of work trying to set this up so I had this to go on when my recovery was happening to help me get through it as well. But, recovery's still happening every day. Just finished getting leave of absence, whatever, short-term disability, finished with work, and that'll probably be like June when I go back, because the left hand is still full of the carpal tunnel. Right hand, bye Shelter. Mostly healed. Kind of bruisey on the wrist, but looking good. And way more functional than the left hand, but there's no strength. I mean, I can lift a cup now. That's something at least. But my 2-year-old's stronger than my right hand. She grabbed my hand away from me and then wrapped her legs around it the other day, and I was like, okay, you win. I don't get my hand back. No problem. So yeah, being out strong-armed by a toddler, not fun, but the worst part are the bumps and bruises between her and hyper little Evie. I'm gonna treat such a good puppers. Good girl. That's our sweetie me. Good pup, though. She doesn't know what to do when I'm sick. She's not one of those, nurse you back to health dogs. She has way too much anxiety for that. My cat, he's the nurse. He hasn't left my side for, years, but the whole time, I was laid out in bed, he was by my side and never moved. My nurse kitty. I think he just likes a nap buddy. Spends most of his life sleeping. He's old man. He will be 16-year-old kitty at the end of May. He's almost 16. So he gets to be an old man. Though I still get mad at him when he steals my food off my plate and eats my wires. But for the most part, he's a good little guy. He used to be a big boy. He's about half the size he used to be. Maine Coons average about 18 to 20 pounds, and he was a mix, but he was still in that 16 to 18 pound range most of his life, and now he is barely over 8 pounds. So, oh man, Kenny with thyroid problems, but he gets his pills, his special diet. Everyone's spoiled around here. He probably wants one of these too. Let's see. Ooh. Very interested. Slightly tempted. He's in a pretty much eat anything that resembles food sort of mentality, so. But besides his thyroid, he hasn't had like health issues. Besides that, I mean, obviously that's a big deal. But managed. We manage it. His medicine's the right dose. Oh. He discovered it. The temptation for treats was too great. I don't think he can make it over here through all the wires. Nope. He gives up. Dog treats aren't worth it. I'm just really glad to be able to feel a little bit more human again. My hand not working, my whole focus was, okay, make sure all the things that I normally do are taken care of. Kids, pets, husband, that sort of thing. House. So it was just kind of like I was directing everyone to make sure those things were done, but I kind of left myself out a bit, unfortunately. Had some stupid steroid shots for migraines in my head, and steroids make me crazy. I didn't factor that in at all. So I'm also starving, but can't eat. It's a lot. I'm so thankful for the support though. Like I had my team, my community. I had my backup. I just wasn't a very good director as I normally am. But hey, the steroids helped my head, I think. The surgery helped my hand. Ooh, pop in my neck too. So, I guess it's progress. But it was very painful progress. And I just know that I have to do it again on the left hand. So I feel like I have learned a lot of lessons and gained some good skills for next time. But man, it was it was tough. I won't lie. And I'm still just in shock from the lack of communication from my surgeon and caring treatment, aftercare, I think is the better term. Pretty much had to beg for physical therapy, which I've still not heard back from, and will have to start bugging and calling myself, because that's what you gotta do in these day and ages. That's the truth. I mean, any medical specialty, you have to be on it yourself. You can't depend on the doctor or the staff, the hospital. You gotta make sure you are fully aware. And people like my grandmother, who just had pacemaker surgery, she's just okay, I'll be immobilized left hand for 6 weeks, but doesn't have the immediate care for the first week. But she hasn't been discharged yet. That was yesterday. It just really sucks. Like, there is so much going on in like my like family community circle, and I can't do anything to help. So that's like frustrating. On top of my healing was dramatic. Like, the first few days my pain meds didn't work. We realized that from our own research, even after contacting my doctor multiple times, that it wasn't working with some of my other meds. They didn't metabolize correctly. Had to go to the strong, full-on Percocets just to even get a tiny bit of relief by day 2-3. I just don't think anyone should have to go through surgery and immediately be in that much pain. That's pretty much what the pills are for, is those first, couple days. But unfortunately, after that, I was so out of it. I was in heavy amounts of pain for super long time, 2 full weeks, and the pain meds did something really weird with my sensory processing. It made me hyper sensory active at the same time as dulling, the pain nerve. So it was like anytime it slightly started to wear off, I felt the pain like 10 times more than I was actually feeling it. And that was for every sensation. Like, if there was even like someone dropped a pin, I like jumped out of my skin. Like, it was every sensation. Like, the dog brushed up against me and I was just like So I mean, it was a really weird thing that I did not account for in my recovery as well. Setback really was not like, I just did so much research, so much planning, so much setup that I felt like I wasn't nervous for the actual surgery. I was nervous because I have excessive separation anxiety from my daughter, and she is very picky about me and bossing me around and controlling me and me being around all the time. She's very, 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 very particular. And thank goodness she can communicate very well, because she could literally just be like, no, Dad, this now. And she could walk everyone through the routine. But that meant as soon as I come back in the picture, she like relaxed and was just like, I can be crazy baby girl now, because Mom knows my routine. She knows like exactly how to put the bottle together and cut my grapes perfectly and like all these things that she's just specific about. So she just went nuts on me, just like being relaxed, I guess. Like, she finally just was like, stress-free mode. And first few days after independence was just her amped up to 1,000, because party mom time. I mean, I love a party baby, but I was like the lowest of low stamina. So it wasn't helpful. I had to kind of go full mommy boot camp. It's a bit intense. But pain is just, you know, it's a constant. I used to joke that, pain's my friend. Like, it's with me all the time. It never leaves me. It's always, it's always there. Pain's my friend. But that was a long time ago, and I'm still not sure if we're enemies or friends. Frenemies. Neutral. It's a battle. I'd rather work with it, not against it. My biggest pain reliever is just stretches, yoga, freaking, meditation style Tai Chi, slow, controlled movements. Something you can, really push those ligaments and muscles to be kind of warmed up and ready to function again, essentially. All right, puppy deserves a few more treats. She's just being so cute. I do miss working with animals. Absolutely. Oh, you gotta lay back on your bed. You're on a camera. There you go. Good job, puppers. I am a professional cat and dog petter. I wish I could put that on my resume, because I literally have some good animal petting skills, and I really miss being able to give that calm, reassuring touch to those super scared shelter pets. Some of these animals never even knew a nice touch in their life. Especially like the feral cats. There was nothing more rewarding than spending 2 weeks slowly befriending a very, feral kitten. And feral kittens can be rehabbed. Feral cats, not so much. But, that emotional connection, that empathy transcends, through all of animal kind. And it's felt, it's really definitely felt both ways. That companionship is deep. Our fur babies are very important, and we're important to them. Or our scaly or feathered friends. I would never leave them out. Or hairy. I guess a horse has hair, not fur. Well, my little minions, spring has sprung. We are in full swing. Allergy mode is upon us. The winds be sweeping down the plains. And of course, it's time for all the outdoor activities. Egg hunts, parties, play, play, play. My little nature princess is so happy. Any day it's above 50. Well, thanks for listening to my rants. Believe we've got some Alice to dive into down the rabbit hole. Oh, but bumper streets for sure. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. If you didn't join us last time, this is free, open source, Project Gutenberg ebook. If you don't know about Project Gutenberg, it is a basically full collection of free to use, open source, everything that's out of copyright, essentially. You can get Kindle versions. You can read it on the website. Pull it up on your phone. And they have pretty much everything, so let's get cozy here. Read a little Alice. We're on chapter 4. The rabbit sends in a little bill. It was the white rabbit trotting slowly back again and looking anxiously about as it went, as if it had lost something, and she heard it muttering to itself, the Duchess, oh my dear paws, oh my fur and whiskers. She'll get me executed, as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder? Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves, and she very good-naturedly began hunting about for them. But they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have changed since her swim into the pool, and the great hall with the glass table and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon, the rabbit noticed Alice as she went hunting about and called out to her in an angry tone. Why, Marianne, what are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick now. And Alice was so much frightened that she ran off at once in the direction it pointed to, without trying to explain the mistake it had made. He took me for his housemaid, she said to herself as she ran. How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am. But I'd never take him his fan and gloves. That is, if I can find them. Oh, but I'd better take him. Of course you'd better take them. I mean, he can't be without them. As she said this, she came upon a neat little house, on the door of which was a bright brass plate with the name W. Rabbit engraved upon it. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs, in great fear lest she should meet the real Marianne and be turned out of the house before she had found the fan and gloves. How queer it seems, Alice said to herself, to be doing messages for a rabbit. I suppose Dinah'll be sending me on messages next. And she began fancying the sort of thing that would happen. Miss Alice, come here directly and get ready for your walk. Coming in a minute, nurse, but I've got to see that the mouse doesn't get out. Only I didn't think, Alice went on, that they'd let Dinah stop in the house if it began ordering people about like that. Oh, stop in the house, like come in the house, gotcha. By this time, she had found her way into a tidy little room with a table and a window, and on it, as she had hoped, a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of tiny white kid gloves. She took up the fan and a pair of the gloves and was just going to leave the room when her eyes fell upon a little bottle that stood near the looking glass. There was no label this time, with the words, "Drink me," but nevertheless she uncorked it and put it to her lips. I know something interesting sure to happen, she said to herself, whenever I eat or drink anything. So I'll just see what this bottle does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again, for really, I'm quite tired of being such a tiny little thing. It did so indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she found her head pressing against the ceiling and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't get out the door. I do wish I hadn't drunk quite so much." Alas, it was too late to wish that. She went on growing and growing, and very soon had to kneel down on the floor. In another minute, there was not even room for this, and she tried the effect of lying down with one elbow against the door and the other arm curled around her head. Still, she went on growing, and as the last resource, she put one arm out of the window and one foot up the chimney and said to herself, "Now I can do no more. Whatever happens, what will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle had now had its full effect, and she grew no larger. Still, it was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance of her ever getting out of the room again, no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much pleasanter at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't always growing larger and smaller and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. I almost wish I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole. And yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can have happened to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied that kind of thing never happened. And now, here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me. That there ought. And when I grow up, I'll write one. But I'm grown up now, she added in a sorrowful tone. At least there's no room to grow up any more here. But then, thought Alice, shall I never get any older than I am now? That'll be a comfort one way, never to be an old woman, but then always to have lessons to learn? Oh, I shouldn't like that. "Oh, you foolish Alice," she answered herself. "How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly room for you, and no room at all for any lesson books." And so she went on, taking first one side and then the other, and then making quite a conversation of it altogether. But after a few minutes, she heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. "Marianne, Marianne," said the voice, "fetch me my gloves this moment." Then came a little pattering of feet on the stairs. Alice knew it was the White Rabbit coming to look for her, and she trembled till she shook the house, quite forgetting that she was now about 1,000 times as large as the rabbit, and had no reason to be afraid of it. Presently, the rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it, but as the door opens inwards, and Alice's elbow was pressed hard against it, that attempt proved a failure. Alice heard it say to herself, "Then I'll go round and get in at the window." "That you won't," thought Alice, and after waiting till she fancied she heard the rabbit just under the window, she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch in the air. She did not get hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall and a crash of broken glass, from which she concluded that it was just possible it had fallen into a cucumber frame or something of the sort. Next came an angry voice, the rabbit's. "Pat, Pat, where are you?" And then a voice she had never heard before. "Sure then, I'm here, digging for apples, your honor." "Digging for apples indeed," said the rabbit angrily. "Here, come and help me out of this." Sounds of more broken glass. "Now tell me, Pat, what's that in the window?" Sure it's an arm, your honor." He pronounced it arm. "An arm? You goose! Who ever saw one that size? Why, it fills the whole window." Sure it does, Your Honor. But it's an arm for all that. Well, it's got no business there, at any rate. Go and take it away. There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now and then, such as, Sure, I don't like you, Your Honor, at all. Do as I tell you, you coward. And at last she spread out her hand again and made another snatch in the air. This time there were 2 little shrieks and more sounds of broken glass. What a number of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling me out of the window, I only wish they could. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer. She waited for some time without hearing any more. At last came a rumbling of little cartwheels and the sound of a good many voices, all talking together. She made out the words, Where's the other ladder? Why, I hadn't to bring the other one. Bill's got the other. Bill, fetch it here, lad. Here, put him up at the corner. No, tie him off all together first. They don't reach half as high enough yet. Oh, they'll do well enough. Don't be particular. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear? Mind that loose slate. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below! Pooh, a loud crash. Now, who did that? It was Bill, I fancy. Who's to go down the chimney? Nay, I shan't. You do it. That I won't, then. Bill's to go down. Here, Bill. The master says you're to go down the chimney. Oh. So Bill's got to come down the chimney, has he? Said Alice to herself. Shy, they seem to be put everything upon Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is narrow, to be sure, but I think I can kick it a little. She drew her foot as far down the chimney as she could and waited till she heard a little animal. She couldn't guess of what sort it was, scratching and scrambling about in the chimney, close above her. Then, saying to herself, This is Bill. She gave one sharp kick and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing she heard was a general chorus of, There goes Bill. Then the rabbit's voice along, Catch him, you, by the hedge. Then silence. Then another confusion of voices. Hold up his head. Brandy now. Don't choke him. How fast was it, old fellow? What happened to you? Tell us all about it. Last came a little feeble squeaking voice. That's Bill, thought Alice. Well, I hardly know no more than ye. I'm better now, but a deal too flustered to tell you, and I know it's something comes at me like a jack-in-the-box, and up I goes like a skyrocket. So you did, old fellow, said the others. We must burn the house down, said the rabbit's voice, and Alice called out as loud as she could. If you do, I'll set Dinah on you. There was a dead silence instantly, and Alice thought to herself, I wonder what they will do next. If they had any sense, they'd take the roof off. After a minute or two, they began moving about again, and Alice heard the rabbit say, A barrelful will do, to begin with. A barrelful of what? Thought Alice, but she had not long to doubt, for the next moment a shower of little pebbles came rattling in at the window, and some of them hit her in the face. I'll put a stop to this, she said to herself, and shouted out, You better not do that again, which produced another dead silence. Alice noticed with more surprise that the pebbles were all turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright little idea came into her head. If I eat one of these cakes, she thought, it's sure to make some change in my size, and as it can't possibly make me any larger, it must make me smaller, I suppose. So she swallowed one of the cakes and was delighted to find that she began shrinking directly. As soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard Bill was in the middle, being held up by 2 guinea pigs who were giving it something out of a bottle. They all made a rush at Alice the moment she appeared, but she ran off as hard as she could, and soon found herself safe in a thick wood. "The first thing I've got to do," said Alice to herself, as she wandered about in the wood, "is to grow to my right size again. And the second thing is to find my way into that lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan." It sounded an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged, and only difficulty was that she had not the smallest idea how to set about it, and while she was peering about anxiously among the trees, a little sharp bark just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes, and feebly stretching out one paw, trying to touch her. "Poor little thing," said Alice in a coaxing tone, and she tried hard to whistle to it, but she was terribly frightened all the time at the thought that it might be hungry, in which case it would be very likely to eat her up in spite of all her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a little bit of stick and held it out to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped into the air off all its feet at once with the yelp of delight, woof, woof, and rushed at the stick and made believe to worry it. And Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over, and the moment she appeared on the other side, the puppy made another rush at the stick and tumbled head over heels in its hurry to get a hold of it. Then Alice, thinking it was very like having a game of play with a cart horse, and expecting every moment to be trampled under its feet, ran around the thistle again. Then the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick, running a very little way forwards each time and a long ways back, and barking hoarsely all the time, woof, 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 till at last it sat down a good way off, panting, with its tongue hanging out of its mouth and its great eyes half shut. This seemed to Alice a good opportunity for making her escape, so she set off at once and ran till she was quite tired and out of breath, until the puppy's bark sounded quite faint in the distance. "And yet what a dear little puppy it was," said Alice, and she leant against a buttercup to rest herself and fanned herself with one of the leaves. "I should have liked teaching it tricks very much, if I'd only been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I'd nearly forgotten that I've got to grow up again. Let me see, how is it to be managed? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other, but the great question is, what?" The great question certainly was what. Alice looked all around her at the flowers and the blades of grass, but she did not see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom growing near her about the same height as herself, and when she had looked under it, and on both sides of it, and behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was on top of it. She stretched herself up on tiptoe and peeped over the edge of the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large blue caterpillar that was sitting on top with its arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah, and taking not the smallest notice of her or of anything else. Chapter 5. Advice from a caterpillar. Only the best advice comes from a caterpillar. You can lay down now. You don't have to wait. Go lay down. Get comfy. Now she's just hiding from you. Okay, one more treat. I'm sorry. Puppy treat. Good girl. All right, advice from a caterpillar. Let's see what we can learn. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time in silence. At last, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and addressed her in a languid, sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, I hardly know, sir. Just at present, at least, I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have been changed several times since then." "What do you mean by that?" said the caterpillar sternly. "Explain yourself." I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir," said Alice, "because I'm not myself, you see." "I don't see," said the caterpillar. I'm afraid I can't put it more clearly," Alice replied very politely, "for I can't understand it myself to begin with, and being so many different sizes in a day is very confusing." "It isn't," said the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps you haven't found it so yet," said Alice, "but when you have to turn into a chrysalis, you will someday, you know, and then after that, into a butterfly. I should think you'll feel it a little queer, won't you?" "Not a bit," said the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps your feelings may be different," said Alice. "All I know is it would feel very queer to me." "You?" said the caterpillar contemptuously. "Who are you?" Which brought them back again to the beginning of the conversation. Alice felt a little irritated at the caterpillar's making such very short remarks, and then she drew herself up and said very gravely, "I think you ought to tell me who you are first." "Why?" said the caterpillar. There was another puzzling question, and as Alice could not think of any good reason, and as the caterpillar seemed to be in a very unpleasant state of mind, she turned away. "Come back," the caterpillar called after her. "I've something important to say." This sounded promising, certainly. Alice turned and came back. "Keep your temper," said the caterpillar. "Is that all?" said Alice, swallowing down her anger as well as she could. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice thought she might as well wait, as she had nothing else to do, and perhaps after all it might tell her something worth hearing. For some minutes it puffed away without speaking. But at last it unfolded its arms, took the hookah out of its mouth again, and said, "So you think you're changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I am, sir," said Alice. I can't remember things as I used to, and I don't keep the same size for 10 minutes together." "Can't remember what things?" said the caterpillar. "Well, I've tried to say, 'How doth the little busy bee?' but it came out all different," Alice replied in a very melancholy voice. "Repeat. You are old, Father William," said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white, and yet you instantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain, but now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turned a black somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that? In my youth, said the sage, as he shook his grey locks, I kept all my limbs very supple. By the use of this ointment, 1 shilling 1 box. Allow me to sell you a couple. You are old, said the youth, and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than sweet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the bleak. Pray, how did you manage to do it? In my youth, said this father, I took to the law and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life. You are old, said the youth. One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever. Yet you're balanced an eel on the end of your nose, what made you so awfully clever. I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough, said his father. Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to this stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs. That is not said right, said the caterpillar. Not quite right, I'm afraid, said Alice timidly. Some of the words have got altered. It is wrong from beginning to end, said the caterpillar decidedly, and there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. What size do you want to be? It asked. Oh, I'm not particular as to size, Alice hastily replied. Only one doesn't like changing so often, you know. I don't know, said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. She had never been so much contradicted in her life before, and she felt that she was losing her temper. Are you content now? Said the caterpillar. Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind, said Alice. 3 inches is such a wretched height to be. It is a very good height indeed, said the caterpillar angrily, rearing itself up as it spoke. It was exactly 3 inches high. But I'm not used to it, pleaded poor Alice in a piteous tone, and she thought of herself, I wish the creatures wouldn't be so easily offended. You'll get used to it in no time. You'll get used to it in time, said the caterpillar, and it put the hookah into its mouth and began smoking again. This time, Alice waited patiently until it chose to speak again. In a minute or two, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and yawned once or twice and shook itself. Then it got down off the mushroom and crawled away in the grass, merely remarking as it went, One side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter. One side of what? The other side of what? Thought Alice to herself. Of the mushroom, said the caterpillar, just as if she had asked it out loud. In another moment, it was out of sight. Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom for a minute, trying to make out which were the 2 sides of it. And as it was perfectly round, she found this a very difficult question. However, at last she stretched her arms around it as far as they would go and broke off a bit of the edge with each hand. And now, which is which, she said to herself, and then nibbled a little off the right-hand bit to try the effect. The next moment, she felt a violent blow beneath her chin. It had struck her foot. She was a good deal frightened by this very sudden change, but she felt that there was no time to be lost, as she was shrinking rapidly. So she set to work at once to eat some of the other bit. Her chin was pressed so closely against her foot that there was hardly room to open her mouth, but she did it at last and managed to swallow a morsel of the left-hand bit. Come, my head's free at last, said Alice in a tone of delight, which changed into alarm in another moment when she found that her shoulders were nowhere to be found. All she could see, when she looked down, was an immense length of neck, which seemed to rise like a stalk out of the sea of green leaves that lay far below her. What can all that green stuff be? And where have my shoulders got to? And oh, my poor hands! How is it I can't see you? She was moving them about as she spoke, but no result seemed to follow except a little shaking among the distant green leaves. As there seemed to be no chance of getting to her hands up to her hands up to her head, she tried to get her head down to them, and was delighted to find that her neck would bend about easily in any direction like a serpent. She had just succeeded in curving it down into a graceful zigzag, and was going to dive in amongst the leaves, when she found it to be nothing but the tops of the trees under which she had been wandering. When a sharp hiss made her draw back in a hurry, a large pigeon had flown into her face, and was beating her violently with its wings. "Serpent!" screamed the pigeon. "I am not a serpent," said Alice indignantly. "Let me alone." "Serpent, I say," repeated the pigeon, but in a more subdued tone, and added with a kind of snub, "I've tried every way, and nothing seems to suit them." "I haven't the least idea what you're talking about," said Alice. "I've tried the roots of trees, I've tried the banks, I've tried the hedges," the pigeon went on, without attending to her. "But those serpents, there's no pleasing them." Alice was more and more puzzled, but she thought there was no use in saying anything more till the pigeon had finished. "As if it was trouble enough hatching the eggs," said the pigeon. "But I must be on the lookout for serpents, night and day. Why, I haven't had a wink of sleep in these 3 weeks." I'm very sorry you've been annoyed," said Alice, who was beginning to see its meaning. And just as I'd taken the highest tree in the wood," continued the pigeon, raising its voice to a shriek, "and just as I was thinking I should be free of them at last, they must needs come wriggling down from the sky. Ah, serpent!" But I'm not a serpent, I tell you," said Alice. I'm a... "Well, what are you?" said the pigeon. "I can see you're trying to invent something." I'm a little girl," said Alice, rather doubtfully, as she remembered the number of changes she had gone through that day. "A likely story, indeed," said the pigeon in a tone of the deepest contempt. "I've seen a good many little girls in my time, but never one with such a neck as that. No, you're a serpent, and there's no use denying it. I suppose you'll be telling me next that you've never tasted an egg." I have tasted eggs, certainly," said Alice, who was a very truthful child. "But little girls eat eggs quite as much as serpents do, you know." "I don't believe it," said the pigeon. "But if they do, why then they're a kind of serpent. That's all I can say." This was such a new idea to Alice that she was quite silent for a minute or two, which gave the pigeon the opportunity of adding, "You're looking for eggs, I know that well enough. And what does it matter to me, you're a little girl or a serpent?" "It matters a good deal to me," said Alice hastily. "But I'm not looking for eggs, as it happens, and if I was, I shouldn't want yours. I don't like them raw." "Well, be off then," said the pigeon in a sulky tone, as it settled down again into its nest. Alice crouched down among the trees as well as she could, for her neck kept getting entangled amongst the branches, and every now and then she had to stop and untwist it. After a while she remembered that she had still held the pieces of mushroom in her hands, and she set to work very carefully, nibbling first at one, then the other, and growing sometimes taller and sometimes shorter, until she had succeeded in bringing herself down to her usual height. It was so long since she had been anything near the right size that it felt quite strange at first, but she got used to it in a few minutes and began talking to herself as usual. "Come, there's half my plan down now. How puzzling all these changes are. I'm never sure what I'm going to be from one minute to another. However, I've got back to my right size. The next thing is to get into that beautiful garden. How is that to be done, I wonder? As she said this, she came suddenly upon an open place, with a little house in it about 4 feet high. Whoever lives here, thought Alice, it'll never do to come upon them this size. Why, I should frighten them out of their wits. So she began nibbling at the right-hand bit again, and did not venture go near the house until she had brought herself down to 9 inches high. Chapter 6. Pig and Pepper. Pig and pepper. I mean, I like caramelized peppery bacon. Does that count? I bet she mentions eating him again. It sounds like what Alice would do. For a minute or two, she stood looking at the house and wondering what to do next, when suddenly a footman in livery came running out of the wood. She considered him to be a footman because he was in livery. Otherwise, judging by his face only, she would have called him a fish, and rapped loudly at the door with his knuckles. It was opened by another footman in livery with a round face and large eyes like a frog, and both footmen, Alice noticed, had powdered hair that curled all over their heads. She felt very curious to know what it was all about, and crept a little way out of the wood to listen. The fish footman began by producing from under his arm a great letter, nearly as large as himself, and this he handed over to the other, saying in a solemn tone, "For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet." The frog footman repeated in the same solemn tone, only changing the order of the words a little. "From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess to play croquet." Then they bowed low, and their curls got entangled together. Alice laughed so much at this that she had to run back into the wood for fear of their hearing her, and when she next peeped out, the fish footman was gone, and the other was sitting on the ground next near the door, staring stupidly up into the sky. Alice went timidly up to the door and knocked. There's no sort of use in knocking," said the footman, "and that's for 2 reasons. First, because I'm on the same side of the door as you are. Secondly, because you're making such a noise inside, no one could possibly hear you." And there certainly was a most extraordinary noise going on within. A constant howling and sneezing, and every now and then a great crash, as if a dish or kettle had been broken to pieces. "Please, then," said Alice, "how am I to get in?" "There might be some sense in your knocking," the footman went on without attending to her, "if we had the door between us. For instance, if you were inside, you might knock, and I could let you in. Or I could let you out, you know." He was looking up into the sky all the time he was speaking, and this Alice thought decidedly uncivil. "But perhaps he can't help it," she said to herself. "His eyes are so very nearly at the top of his head, but at any rate, he might answer questions. How am I to get in?" she repeated aloud. "I shall sit here," the footman remarked, "till tomorrow." At this moment, the door of the house opened, and a large plate came skimming out, straight at the footman's head. It just grazed his nose and broke into pieces against one of the trees behind him. "Or next day, maybe," the footman continued in the same tone, exactly as if nothing had happened. How am I to get in? Asked Alice again in a louder tone. Are you to get in at all? Said the footman. That's the first question, you know. It was no doubt only Alice did not like to be told so. It's really dreadful, she muttered to herself. The way all these creatures argue. It's enough to drive one crazy. The footman seemed to think this a very good opportunity for repeating his remark, with variations. I shall sit here, he said, on and off, for days and days. But what am I to do? Said Alice. Anything you like, said the footman, and began whistling. Oh, there's no use in talking to him, said Alice desperately. He's perfectly idiotic. And she opened the door and went in. The door led right into a large kitchen, which was full of smoke from one end to the other. The Duchess was sitting in a three-legged stool in the middle, nursing a baby. The cook was leaning over the fire, stirring a large cauldron, which seemed to be full of soup. There's certainly too much pepper in that soup, Alice said to herself, as well as she could for sneezing. Achoo! There was certainly too much of it in the air. Even the Duchess sneezed occasionally. Achoo! And as for the baby, it was sneezing and howling alternately without a moment's pause. Achoo! Achoo! The only things in the kitchen that did not sneeze were the cook and a large cat, which was sitting on the hearth and grinning from ear to ear. Please, would you tell me, said Alice, a little timidly, for she was not quite sure it was good manners for her to speak first, why your cat grins like that? It's a Cheshire cat, said the Duchess, and that's why, pig. She said the last word with such sudden violence that Alice quite jumped. But she saw in another moment that it was addressed to the baby, and not her. So she took courage and went on again. I didn't know that Cheshire cats always grinned. In fact, I didn't know that cats could grin. They all can, said the Duchess, and most of them do. I don't know any that do, Alice said very politely, feeling quite pleased to have gotten into a conversation. You don't know much, said the Duchess, and that's a fact. Alice did not at all like the tone of this remark and thought it would be as well to introduce some other subject of conversation. While she was trying to fix on one, the cook took the cauldron of soup off the fire and at once set to work throwing everything within her reach at the Duchess and the baby. The fire irons came first. Then followed a shower of saucepans, plates, and dishes. The Duchess took no notice of them, even when they hit her, and the baby was howling so much already that it was quite impossible to say whether the blows hurt it or not. Oh, please, mind what you're doing, cried Alice, jumping up and down in agony of terror. Oh, there goes his precious nose, as an unusually large saucepan flew close by and very nearly carried it off. If everybody minded their own business, the Duchess said in a hoarse growl, the world would go round a deal faster than it does. Which would not be an advantage, said Alice, who felt very glad to get an opportunity of showing off a little of her knowledge. Just think of what work it would make with all the day and night. You see, the earth takes 24 hours to turn round on its axis. Talking of axes, said the Duchess, chop off her head. Alice glanced rather anxiously at the cook to see if she meant to take the hint. But the cook was busily stirring the soup and seemed not to be listening, so she went on again. 24 hours, I think. Or is it 12? Oh, don't bother me, said the Duchess. I never could abide figures. And with that she began nursing her child again, singing a sort of lullaby to it as she did so, and giving a violent shake at the end of every line. Speak roughly to your little boy and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy because he knows it teases. The chorus, in which the cook and the baby joined. Wow, wow, wow. While the Duchess sang the second verse of the song, she kept tossing the baby violently up and down, and the poor little thing howled so that Alice could hardly hear the words. I speak severely to my boy, I beat him when he sneezes, for he can thoroughly enjoy the pepper when he pleases. Wow, wow, wow. Here, you may nurse it for a bit if you'd like, the Duchess said to Alice, flinging the baby at her as she spoke. I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen. And she hurried out of the room. The cook threw a frying pan after her as she went out, but it just missed her. Alice caught the baby with some difficulty, as it was a queer-shaped little creature, and held out its arms and legs in all directions. Just like a starfish, thought Alice. The poor little thing was snorting like a steam engine when she caught it, and kept doubling itself up and straightening itself out again, so that altogether, for the first minute or two, it was as much as she could do to hold it. As soon as she had made out the proper way of nursing it, which was to twist it up in sort of a knot and keep tight hold of its right ear and left foot so as to prevent it undoing itself, she carried it out into the open air. If I don't take this child away with me, thought Alice, they're sure to kill it in a day or two. Wouldn't it be murder to leave it behind? She said the last words out loud, and the little thing grunted in reply. It had left off sneezing by this time. Don't grunt, said Alice. That's not at all a proper way of expressing yourself. The baby grunted again. And Alice looked very anxiously into its face to see what the matter with it. There could be no doubt that it had a very turn-up nose, much more like a snout than a real nose. Also, its eyes were getting extremely small for a baby. Altogether, Alice did not like the look of the thing at all. But perhaps it was only sobbing, she thought, and looked into its eyes again to see if there were any tears. No, there were no tears. If you're going to turn into a pig, my dear, said Alice seriously, I'll have nothing more to do with you. Mind now. The poor little thing sobbed again, or grunted, it was impossible to say which, and they went on for some while in silence. Alice was just beginning to think to herself, now, what am I to do with this creature when I get home? When it grunted again so violently that she looked down at its face in some alarm. This time there could be no mistake about it. It was neither more nor less than a pig, and she felt that it would be quite absurd for her to carry it further. So she set the little creature down and felt quite relieved to see it trot away quietly into the wood. If it had grown up, she said to herself, it would have made a dreadfully ugly child, but it makes rather a handsome pig, I think. And she began thinking over other children she knew who might do very well as pigs, and that just saying to herself, if one only knew the right way to change them. Then she was a little startled by seeing the Cheshire Cat sitting on a bough of a tree a few yards off. The cat only grinned when it saw Alice. It looked good-natured, she thought. Still, it had very long claws and great many teeth, so she felt that it ought to be treated with respect. Cheshire Puss, she began rather timidly, as she did not at all know whether it would like the name. However, it only grinned a little wider. Come, it pleased so far, thought Alice, and she went on. Would you please tell me which way I ought to go from here? That depends a good deal on where you want to get to, said the cat. I don't much care where, said Alice. Then it doesn't matter which way you go, said the cat. So long as I get somewhere, Alice added as an explanation. Oh, you're sure to do that, said the cat, if you only walk long enough. Alice felt that this could not be denied. so she tried another question. What sort of people live about here? In that direction, the cat said, waving his right paw around, lives a hatter, and in that direction, waving the other paw, lives a March Hare. Visit either you like. They're both mad. But I don't want to go among mad people, Alice remarked. Oh, you can't help that, said the cat. We're all mad here. I'm mad. You're mad. How do you know I'm mad? Said Alice. You must be, said the cat, or you wouldn't have come here. Alice didn't think that proved it at all. However, she went on. And how do you know that you're mad? To begin with, said the cat, a dog's not mad. You grant that? I suppose so, said Alice. Well, then, the cat went on. You see, a dog growls when it's angry and wags its tail when it's pleased. Now I growl when I'm pleased and I wag my tail when I'm angry. Therefore, I'm mad. I call it purring, not growling, said Alice. Call it what you like, said the cat. Do you play croquet with the queen? Do you play croquet with the queen today? I should like it very much, said Alice, but I haven't been invited yet. You'll see me there, said the cat, and vanished. Alice was not much surprised at this. She was getting so used to the queer things happening here. While she was looking at the place where it had been, it suddenly appeared again. By the by, what became of the baby? Said the cat. I'd nearly forgotten to ask. It turned into a pig, Alice quietly said, just as if it had come back in a natural way. I thought it would, said the cat, and vanished again. Alice waited a little, half expecting to see it again, but it did not appear, and after a minute or two she walked on in the direction in which the March Hare was said to live. I've seen hatters before, she said to herself. The March Hare will be much more interesting, and perhaps as this is May, it won't be raving mad, at least not so mad as it was in March. As she said this, she looked up, and there was the cat again, sitting on a branch of a tree. Did you say pig or fig? Said the cat. I said pig, replied Alice, and I wish you wouldn't keep appearing and vanishing so suddenly. You make one quite giddy. All right, said the cat, and this time it vanished quite slowly, beginning with the end of the tail and ending with the grin, which remained some time after the rest of it had gone. Well, I've often seen a cat without a grin, thought Alice, but a grin without a cat is the most curious thing I've ever saw in my life. She had not gone much farther before she came in sight of the house of the March Hare. She thought it must be the right house because the chimney was shaped like ears and the roof was thatched with fur. It was so large a house that she did not like to go near till she had nibbled some more of the left-hand bit of mushroom and raised herself to about 2 feet high. Even then she walked up towards it rather timidly, saying to herself, Suppose it could be raving mad after all. I almost wish I'd gone to see the Hatter instead. Time for a mad tea party. But I'm out of tea. So I'm going to have to BRB with this tea. Be back shortly, kids. Hello, hello. Welcome back, my goblins and ghouls. Hope you're having an epic Friday. We just started reading more Alice. We got to chapter 7. We're about to have a tea party, and I had run out of tea. It's pretty much not okay. So I had to get a little mad for get my tea party on. So let's sip our tea for a second. Get that going. Oh, sorry. Here, Snorlax. Feed a puppers a treat. Thank our viewers for chilling, listening, lurking, watching VODs, whatever you're here for, man. I'm here. And thank you. In whatever capacity, for being here too. I appreciate it. Hope you're getting some afternoon energy, afternoon chills. Whichever way you're going, up or down, left or right, round and round. I promise she does kind of chew them. She has, like, a lot of back teeth. And by a lot, I mean, like, 8. Maybe 12. They're hard to count. I know she's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. She's got like 12 in the front. I think she has like 24 left total out of, like 48 teeth. Oh. It's been a day for teeth. Had to take my little one to the dentist. She was nervous, but she did good. The toothbrush doctor. I told her we were going to go look at her teeth at the doctor. And she went, oh, the toothbrush doctor. So I was like, well, sure. I know they'll give her a toothbrush at the end, so. And they even brushed her little teeth. She got to demonstrate how good she is at doing it herself with her little circles. We are teeth brushing pros around here. Hey, Mrs. Glad you're off work. Yeah, teeth are important, though. Teeth are good. Mrs. works with teeth all day. I was definitely checking in with her about what the heck I should do today. But now she's just got more personality to her smile, I guess. The guilt's hard. The guilt is real. Well, welcome in, Mrs. We're about to have a mad tea party. Let me get some story pulled up here, but of course, little puppers needs a chomp, chomp, chomp. And they're so tiny. One more. Good girl. Good, Evie. You can go lay down now. You're comfy. Thank you. I've got some English breakfast. Seemed very fitting for my tea. English breakfast. Is that or Earl Grey? But let's go full English breakfast. For Alice in Wonderland, a mad tea party. There was a table set out under a tree in front of a house, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea at it. A dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it and talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice, only it's asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. The table was a large one, but the three were all crowded together at one corner of it. No room, no room, they cried out when they saw Alice coming. There's plenty of room, said Alice indignantly as she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. Have some wine, the March Hare said in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all around the table, but there was nothing on it but tea. I don't see any wine, she remarked. There isn't any, said the March Hare. Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it, said Alice angrily. it wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited, said the March Hare. I didn't know it was your table, said Alice. It's laid for a great many more than 3. Your hair wants cutting, said the Hatter. He had been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was his first speech. You should learn not to make personal remarks, Alice said with some severity. It's very rude. The Hatter opened his eyes very wide on hearing this, but all he said was, Why is a raven like a writing desk? Come, we shall have some fun now, thought Alice. I'm glad they begun asking riddles. I believe I can guess that, she added aloud. Do you mean that you can find the answer to it? Said the March Hare. Exactly so, said Alice. Then you should say what you mean, the March Hare went on. I do, Alice hastily replied. At least I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know. Not the same thing a bit, said the Hatter. You might as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see. You might as well say, added the March Hare, that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like. You might as just well say, added the Dormouse, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe. It is the same thing with you, said the Hatter, and there the conversation dropped and the party sat silent for a minute, while Alice thought over all she could remember about ravens and writing desks, which wasn't much. The Hatter was the first to break the silence. What day of the month is it? He asked. Turning to Alice, he had taken his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and then and holding it to his ear. Alice considered a little and then said, The 4th? 2 days wrong, sighed the Hare. I told you butter wouldn't suit the works, he added, looking angrily at the March Hare. It was the best butter, the March Hare meekly replied. Yes, but some crumbs must have got in as well, the Hatter grumbled. You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife. The March Hare took the watch, looked at it gloomily. Then he dipped it into his cup of tea and looked at it again. But he could think of nothing better to say than his first remark. It was the best butter, you know. Alice had been looking over his shoulder with some curiosity. What a funny watch, she remarked. It tells the day of the month and doesn't tell what o'clock it is. Why should it? Muttered the Hare. Does your watch tell you what year it is? Of course not, Alice replied very readily. But that's because it stays the same year for such a long time together. Which is just the case with mine, said the Hatter. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to have no sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. I don't quite understand you, she said, as politely as she could. The Dormouse is asleep again, said the Hatter, and he poured a little hot tea upon its nose. The Dormouse shook its head impatiently and said, without opening its eyes, Of course. Just what I was going to remark myself. Have you guessed the riddle yet? The Hatter said, turning to Alice again. No, I gave it up, Alice replied. What's the answer? I haven't the slightest idea, said the Hatter. Nor I, said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. I think you might do something better with the time, she said, than waste it in asking riddles that have no answers. If you knew the time as well as I do, said the Hatter, you wouldn't talk about wasting it. That's him. I don't know what you mean, said Alice. Of course you don't, the Hatter said, tossing his head contemptuously. I dare say you never spoke to time. Perhaps not, Alice cautiously replied, but I know I have to beat time when I learn music. Ah, that accounts for it, said the Hatter. He won't stand beating. Now, if you only kept on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you'd like with the clock. For instance, suppose it were 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. You'd only have to whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock in a twinkling. 1:30, time for dinner. I only wish it was, the March Hare said to itself in a whisper. That would be grand, certainly, said Alice thoughtfully. But then I shouldn't be hungry for it, you know. Not at first, perhaps, said the Hatter, but you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you liked. Is that the way you manage? Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head mournfully. Not I, he replied. We quarreled last March, just before he went mad, you know, pointing with his teaspoon at the March Hare. It was at the great concert given by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing, Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, I wonder what you're at. You know the song, perhaps? I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes on, you know, the Hatter continued, in this way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. Here the Dormouse took itself and began singing in its sleep, Twinkle, 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 and went on so long that they had to pinch it to make it stop. Well, I hardly finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen jumped up and bawled out, He's murdering the time off with his head. How dreadfully savage, exclaimed Alice. And ever since that, the Hatter went on in a mournful tone, he won't do a thing I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. A bright idea came into Alice's head. Is that the reason so many tea things are put out here? She asked. Yes, that's it, said the Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time, and we've no time to wash the things between whiles. And then you keep moving around, I suppose? Said Alice. Exactly so, said the Hatter, as the things get used up. But what happens when you come to the beginning again? Alice ventured to ask. Suppose we change the subject, the March Hare interrupted, yawning. I'm getting tired of this. I vote the young lady tells us a story. I'm afraid I don't know one, said Alice, rather alarmed at the proposal. Then the Dormouse shall, they both cried. Wake up, Dormouse! And they pinched it on both sides at once. The Dormouse slowly opened its eyes. I wasn't asleep, he said in a hoarse, feeble voice. I heard every word you fellows were saying. Tell us a story, said the March Hare. Yes, please do, pleaded Alice. And be quick about it, added the Hare, or you'll be asleep again before it's done. Once upon a time, there were 3 little sisters. The Dormouse began in a great hurry. Let's start that again. Once upon a time, there were 3 little sisters. The Dormouse began in a great hurry. And their names were Elise, Lazy, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of the well. What did they live on? Said Alice, who always took a great interest in questions of eating and drinking. They lived on treacle, said the Dormouse after thinking a minute or two. They couldn't have done that, you know, Alice gently remarked. They'd have been ill. So they were, said the Dormouse. Very ill. Alice tried to fancy to herself what such an extraordinary way of living would be like, but it puzzled her too much, so she went on. But why did they live at the bottom of a well? Take some more tea, the March Hare said to Alice, very earnestly. I've had nothing yet, Alice replied in an offended tone, so I can't take more. You mean you can't take less, said the Hatter. It's very easy to take more than nothing. Nobody asked your opinion, said Alice. Who's making personal remarks now? The Hatter asked triumphantly. Alice did not quite know what to say to this, so she helped herself to some tea and bread and butter, and then turned to the Dormouse and repeated her question. Why did they live at the bottom of a well? The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it, and then said, It was a trickle well. There's no such thing, Alice was beginning very angrily, but the Hatter and the March Hare went, Shh, shh, and the Dormouse sulkily remarked, If you can't be civil, you'd better finish the story for yourself. No, please go on, Alice said very humbly. I won't interrupt again. I dare say there may be one. What indeed, said the Dormouse indignantly. However, he consented to go on. And so, these three little sisters, they were learning to draw, you know. What did they draw? Said Alice, quite forgetting her promise. Treacle, said the Dormouse, without considering at all this time. I want a clean cup, interrupted the Hatter. Let's all move one place on. He moved on as he spoke, and the Dormouse followed him. The March Hare moved into the Dormouse's place, and Alice rather unwillingly took the place of the March Hare. The Hatter was the only one who got any advantage from the change, and Alice was a good deal worse off than before, as the March Hare had just upset the milk jug into his plate. Alice did not wish to offend the Dormouse again, so she began very cautiously, But I don't understand. Where did they draw the trickle from? You can draw water out of a water well, said the Hatter. So I should think you could draw treacle out of a treacle well. Eh? Stupid? But they were in the well, Alice said to the Dormouse, not choosing to notice his last remark. Of course they were, said the Dormouse. Well, in. This answer so confused poor Alice that she let the Dormouse go on for some time without interrupting it. They were learning to draw, the Dormouse went on, yawning and rubbing his eyes, for it was getting very sleepy. And they drew all manner of things, everything that begins with an M. Why an M? Said Alice. Why not? Said the March Hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse had closed its eyes by this time and was going off into a doze, but on being pinched by the Hatter, it woke up again with a little shriek and went on. That begins with an M, such as mousetraps and the moon and memory and munchness, and no things are much of muchness, and you never see such things as drawing of a muchness. Really? Now you ask me, said Alice, very much confused. I don't think. Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She got up in great disgust and walked off. The Dormouse fell asleep instantly, and neither of the others took the least notice of her going, though she looked back once or twice, half hoping that they would call after her. The last time she saw them, they were trying to put the Dormouse into the teapot. At any rate, I'll never go there again, said Alice as she picked her way through the wood. It's the stupidest tea party I ever was at in all my life. Just as she said this, she noticed that one of the trees had a door leading right into it. That's very curious, she thought. But everything's curious today. I think I may as well go in at once. And in she went. Once more she found herself in a long hall and close to the little glass table. Now I'll manage better this time, she said to herself, and began taking the little golden key and unlocking the door that led into the garden. Then she went to work nibbling at the mushroom. She had kept a piece of it in her pocket, till she was about a foot high. Then she walked down the little passage, and then she found herself at last in the beautiful garden, among the bright flower beds and the cool fountains. Chapter 8. The Queen's Croquet. I think my mouse is about to fall. My mic is about to fall. 1 minute. Okay, we'll see if it goes crashing down. Hopefully not. You know how it is. Okay. Chapter 8. The Queen's Croquet Ground. A large rose tree stood near the entrance of the garden. The roses growing on it were white, but there were 3 gardeners at it, busily painting them red. Alice thought this a very curious thing, and she went nearer to watch them, and just as she came up to them, she heard one of them say, "Look out now, 5! Don't go splashing paint over me like that." "I couldn't help it," said 5 in a sulky tone. 7 jogged my elbow. On which 7 looked up and said, "That's right, 5. Always lay the blame on others." "You'd better not talk," said 5. "I heard the Queen say only yesterday you deserved to be beheaded." Ooh. I mean, she is the Queen of Hearts. "What for?" you said, the one who had spoken first. "That's none of your business, too," said 7. "Yes, it is his business," said 5. "And I'll tell him. It was for the bringing the cook tulip roots instead of onions." 7 flung down his bush and had just begun, "Well, all the unjust things," when his eye chanced to fall upon Alice, and he stood watching them, and he checked himself suddenly. The others looked around also, and all of them bowed low. "Would you tell me," said Alice, a little timidly, "why you are painting those roses?" 5 and 7 said nothing, but looked at 2. 2 began in a slow voice. "Why, the fact is, you see, miss, this here ought to have been a red rose tree, and we put a white one in by mistake. And if the Queen was to find out, we should all have our heads cut off, you know. So you see, miss, we're doing our best, afore she comes to..." At this moment, 5, who had been anxiously looking across the garden, called out, "The Queen! The Queen!" And the 3 gardeners instantly threw themselves flat upon their faces. There was a sound of many footsteps, and Alice looked around, eager to see the Queen. First came 10 soldiers, carrying clubs. These were all shaped like the 3 gardeners, all oblong and flat, with hands and feet at the corners. Next, the 10 courtiers. These were ornamented all over with diamonds, and walked 2 and 2, as the soldiers did. After these came the royal children. There were 10 of them, and the little dears came jumping merrily along, hand in hand, in couples. They were all ornamented with hearts. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens, and among them Alice recognized the White Rabbit. it was talking in a hurried, nervous manner, smiling at everything that was said, and went about without noticing her. Then followed the Knave of Hearts, carrying the king's crown on a crimson velvet cushion, and, last of all, on this grand procession, came the King and Queen of Hearts. Alice was rather doubtful whether she ought not to lie down on her face like the 3 gardeners, but she could not remember ever having heard such a rule at processions. And besides, what would be the use of a procession, thought she, if people had all to lie down upon their faces so they couldn't see it? So she stood still where she was and waited. When the procession came opposite to Alice, they all stopped and looked at her, and the queen said severely, "Who is this?" She said to the Knave of Hearts, who only bowed and smiled in reply. "Idiot," said the queen, tossing her head impatiently, and turning to Alice, she went on, "What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, so please your majesty," said Alice very politely, but she added to herself, "Why, they're only a pack of cards after all. I needn't be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the queen, pointing to the 3 gardeners who were lying around the rose tree, for you see, as they were lying on their faces, and the pattern on their backs was the same as the rest of the pack, she could not tell whether they were gardeners or soldiers or courtiers, or 3 of them, or 3 of her own children. "How should I know?" said Alice, surprised at her own courage. "It's no business of mine." The queen turned crimson with fury, and after glaring at her for a moment like a wild beast, screamed, "Off with her head! Off!" "Nonsense," said Alice very loudly and decidedly, and the queen was silent. The king laid his hand upon her arm and timidly said, "Consider, my dear, she is only a child." The queen turned angrily away from him and said to the knave, "Turn them over." The knave did so, very carefully, with one foot. "Get up," said the queen in a shrill, loud voice, and the 3 gardeners instantly jumped up and began bowing to the king and the queen, the royal children, and everybody else. "Leave off that," screamed the queen. "You make me giddy." And then, turning to see the rose tree, she went on, "What have you been doing here?" "May it please your majesty," said two, in a very humble tone, going down on one knee as he spoke, "we were trying—" "I see," said the queen, who had meanwhile been examining the roses. "Off with your heads!" And the procession moved on, 3 of the soldiers remaining behind to execute the unfortunate gardeners, who ran to Alice for protection. "You shan't be beheaded," said Alice, and she put them into a large flower pot and stood near. The 3 soldiers wandered about for a minute or two, looking for them, and then quietly marched off after the others. "Are their heads off?" shouted the queen. Their heads are gone, if it please your majesty," the soldiers shouted in reply. "That's right," shouted the queen. "Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent and looked at Alice, as the question was evidently meant for her. "Yeah," shouted Alice. "Come on, then," roared the queen, and Alice joined the procession, wondering very much what would happen next. "Oh, it's a fine day," said a timid voice at her side. She was walking by the White Rabbit, who was peeping anxiously into her face. "Very," said Alice. "Where's the Duchess?" "Hush, hush," said the rabbit in a low, hurried tone. He looked anxiously over his shoulder as he spoke, and then raised himself upon tiptoe, put his mouth close to her ear, and whispered, She's under sentence of execution." "What for?" said Alice. "Did you say, 'What a pity'?" the rabbit asked. "No, I didn't," said Alice. I don't think it's a pity at all. I said, 'What for?'" "She boxed the queen's ears," the rabbit began. Alice gave a little scream of laughter. "Oh, hush," the rabbit whispered in a frightful tone. "The queen will hear you. You see, she came rather late, and the queen said—" "Get to your places!" shouted the queen in a voice of thunder, and people began running about in all directions, tumbling up against each other. However, they got settled down in a minute or two, and the game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a curious croquet ground in her life. It was all ridges and furrows. The balls were live hedgehogs, the mallets live flamingos, and the soldiers had to double themselves up and stand on their hands and feet to make the arches. The chief difficulty Alice found at first was in managing her flamingo. She succeeded in getting its body tucked away comfortably enough under her arm, with its legs hanging down, but generally, just as she had got its neck nicely straightened out and was going to give the hedgehog a blow with its head, it would twist itself round and look up in her face with such a puzzled expression that she could not help bursting out laughing. And when she had got its head down and was going to begin again, it was very provoking to find that the hedgehog had unrolled itself and was in the act of crawling away. Besides all this, there was generally a ridge or furrow in the way wherever she wanted to send the hedgehog to, and as the doubled up soldiers were always getting up and walking off to other parts of the ground, Alice soon came to the conclusion that it was a very difficult game indeed. The players all played at once without waiting for turns. Quarreling all the while, and fighting for the hedgehogs. And in a very short time, the queen was in a furious passion, and went stamping about and shouting off with his head, or off with her head, about once a minute. Alice began to feel very uneasy, to be sure. She had not as yet had any dispute with the queen, but she knew that it might happen any minute. And then, thought she, what would become of me? They're dreadfully fond of beheading people here. The great wonder is that there's anyone left alive. She was looking about for some way of escape and wondering whether she could get away without being seen, when she noticed a curious appearance in the air. It puzzled her very much at first, but after watching it a minute or two, she made it out to be a grin, and she said to herself, "It's the Cheshire Cat. Now I shall have somebody to talk to." "How are you getting on?" said the cat, as soon as there was a mouth enough for it to speak with. Alice waited till the eyes appeared and then nodded. "It's no use speaking to it," she thought, "till its ears have come, or at least one of them." In another minute the whole head appeared, and then Alice put down her flamingo and began an account of the game, feeling very glad she had someone to listen to her. The cat seemed to think that there was enough of it now in sight, and no more of it appeared. "I don't think they play it all fairly," Alice began in a rather complaining tone, "and they all quarreled so dreadfully one can't hear oneself speak. And they don't seem to have any rules in particular. At least, if there are, nobody attends to them. And you've no idea how confusing it is, all the things being alive. For instance, there's the arch I've got to go through next, walking about at the other end of the ground, and I should have croqueted the queen's hedgehog just now, only it ran away when it saw mine coming." "How do you like the queen?" said the cat in a low voice. "Not at all," said Alice. "She's so extremely—" Just then she noticed the queen was close behind her listening, so she went on, "Likely to win, that it's hardly worth while finishing the game." The queen smiled and passed on. "Who are you talking to?" said the king, going up to Alice and looking at the cat's head with great curiosity. "A friend of mine, a Cheshire cat," said Alice. "Allow me to introduce it." "I don't like the look of it at all," said the king. "However, it may kiss my hand if it likes." "I'd rather not," the cat remarked. "Don't be impertinent," said the king, "and don't look at me like that." He got behind Alice as he spoke. "A cat may look at a king?" said Alice. "I've read that in some book, but I don't remember where." "Well, it must be removed," said the king very decidedly. And he called the queen, who was passing at the moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way of settling all difficulties, great or small. "Off with his head!" she said, without even looking round. "I'll fetch the executioner myself," said the king eagerly, and he hurried off. Alice thought she might as well go back and see how the game was going on, as she heard the queen's voice in the distance screaming with passion. She had already heard her sentence 3 of her players to be executed for having missed their turns, and she did not like the look of things at all, as the game was in such confusion that she never knew whether it was her turn or not. So she went in search of her hedgehog. The hedgehog was engaging in a fight with another hedgehog, which seemed to Alice an excellent opportunity for croqueting one of them with the other. The only difficulty was that her flamingo was gone across to the other side of the garden, where Alice could see it trying, in a helpless sort of way, to fly up into a tree. By the time she had caught the flamingo and brought it back, the fight was over, and both the hedgehogs were out of sight. "But it doesn't matter much," thought Alice, "as all the arches are gone from this side of the ground." So she tucked it away under her arm that it might not escape again, and went back for a little more conversation with her friend. When she got back to the Cheshire Cat, she was surprised to find quite a large crowd collected around it. There was a dispute going on between the executioner, the king, and the queen, who were all talking at once, while all the rest were quite silent and looking very uncomfortable. The moment Alice appeared, she was appealed to by all 3 to settle the question, and they repeated their arguments to her, though, as they all spoke at once, she found it very hard indeed to make out exactly what they said. The executioner's argument was that you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body to cut it off from, that he had never had to do such a thing before, and he wasn't going to begin at his time of life. The king's argument was that anything that had a head could be beheaded, and that you weren't to talk nonsense. The queen's argument was that if something wasn't done about it in less than no time, she'd have everybody executed all around. It was this last remark that had made the whole party look so grave and anxious. Alice could think of nothing else to say but, "If it belongs to the Duchess, you'd better ask her about it." "She's in prison," the queen said to the executioner. "Fetch her here." And the executioner went off like an arrow. The cat's head began fading away the moment he was gone, and by the time he had come back with the Duchess, it had entirely disappeared. So the king and the executioner ran wildly up and down looking for it, while the rest of the party went back to the game. This would be chapter 9, The Mock Turtle's Story. Oh, and I finally lost my mic stand. Okay, one quick mute so I don't murder your ears. All right, goblins and ghouls, we're back. For the Mock Turtle's story. You can't think how glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing, said the Duchess, as she tucked her arm affectionately into Alice's, and they walked off together. Can you go lay on your pillow, Evie? There you go. Get comfy, dog. Yeah, it's Friday. Good job. Good job, Evie. Good job. Let's start over. Chapter 9, The Mock Turtle Story. You can't think how glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing, said the Duchess, as she tucked her arm affectionately into Alice's, and they walked off together. Alice was very glad to find her in such a pleasant temper, and thought to herself that perhaps it was only the pepper that had made her so savage when they met in the kitchen. When I'm a duchess, she said to herself, not in a very hopeful tone, though, I won't have any pepper in my kitchen at all. Soup does very well without. Maybe it's always pepper that makes people hot-tempered. She went on, very much pleased at having found out a new kind of rule. And vinegar makes them sour, and chamomile, that makes them bitter, and barley sugar, and such things that make children sweet-tempered. I only wish people knew that. Then they wouldn't be so stingy about it, you know? She had quite forgotten the Duchess by this time, and was a little startled when she heard her voice so close to her ear. You're thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I can't tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I shall remember in a bit. Perhaps it hasn't one, Alice ventured to remark. Tut, tut, child, said the Duchess. Everything's got a moral, if only you can find it. And she squeezed herself up closer to Alice's side as she spoke. Alice did not much like keeping so close to her, first because the Duchess was very ugly, and secondly because she was exactly the right height to rest her chin upon Alice's shoulder, and it was an uncomfortably sharp chin. However, she did not like to be rude, so she bore it as well as she could. The game's going on rather better now, she said, by way of keeping up the conversation a little. 'Tis so, said the Duchess, and the moral of that is, 'tis love that makes the world go round. Somebody said, Alice whispered, that it's done by everybody minding their own business. Ah, well, it means much the same thing, said the Duchess, digging her sharp little chin into Alice's shoulder, as she added, and the moral of that is, take care of the scents, and the sounds will take care of themselves. How fond she is of finding morals in things, Alice thought to herself. I dare say you're wondering why I don't put my arm around your waist, the Duchess said after a pause. The reason is that I'm doubtful about the temper of your flamingo. Shall I try the experiment? He might bite, Alice cautiously replied, not feeling at all anxious to have the experiment tried. Very true, said the Duchess. Flamingos and mustard both bite. And the moral of that is, birds of a feather flock together. Only mustard isn't a bird, Alice remarked. Right, as usual, said the Duchess. What a clear way you have of putting things. It's a mineral, I think. Of course it is, said the Duchess, who seemed ready to agree to everything that Alice said. There's a large mustard mine near here, and the moral of that is, the more there is of mine, the less there is of yours. Oh, I know, exclaimed Alice, who had not attended to this last remark. It's a vegetable. It doesn't look like one, but it is. I quite agree with you, said the Duchess, and the moral of that is, be what you would seem to be, or if you would like to put it more simply, never imagine yourself not to be otherwise than what it might appear to others that what you were or might have been was not otherwise than what you had been would have appeared to them to be otherwise. I think I should understand that better, Alice said very politely, if I had written it down, but I can't quite follow it as you say. That's nothing to what I could say if I chose, the Duchess replied in a pleasant tone. Pray don't trouble yourself to say it any longer than that, said Alice. Oh, don't talk about trouble, said the Duchess. I make you a present of everything I've said as yet. A cheap sort of present, thought Alice. I'm glad they don't give birthday presents like that. But she did not venture to say it out loud. Thinking again? The Duchess asked, with another dig of her sharp little chin. I've a right to think, said Alice sharply, for she was beginning to feel a little worried. Just about as right, said the Duchess, as pigs have to fly in the... But here, to Alice's great surprise, the Duchess's voice died away, even in the middle of her favorite word, moral, and the arm that was linked into hers began to tremble. Alice looked up, and there stood the Queen in front of them, with her arms folded, frowning like a thunderstorm. A fine day, Your Majesty, the Duchess began in a low, weak voice. Now I gave you fair warning, shouted the Queen, stamping on the ground as she spoke. Either you or your head must be off, and that in about half no time. Take your choice. The Duchess took her choice and was gone in a moment. Let's go on with the game, the Queen said to Alice, and Alice was too much frightened to say a word, but slowly followed her back to the croquet ground. The other guests had taken advantage of the Queen's absence and were resting in the shade. However, the moment they saw her, they hurried back to the game, the Queen merely remarking that a moment's delay would cost them their lives. All the time they were playing, the Queen never left off quarreling with the other players and shouting, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head." Those whom she sentenced were taken into custody by the soldiers, who, of course, had to leave off being archers to do this, so that by the end of half an hour or so, there were no archers left, and all the players, except the King, the Queen, and Alice, were in custody and under sentence of execution. Then the Queen left off, quite out of breath, and said to Alice, "Have you seen the Mock Turtle yet?" "No," said Alice. "I don't even know what a Mock Turtle is." "It's the thing Mock Turtle soup is made from," said the Queen. "I've never saw one or heard of one," said Alice. "Come on, then," said the Queen, "and he shall tell you his story, his history." As they walked off together, Alice heard the King say in a low voice to the company generally, "You're all pardoned. Come, that's a good thing." She said, "Come, that's a good thing," she said to herself, for she had felt quite unhappy at the number of executions the Queen had ordered. Whew! They very soon came upon a griffin, lying fast asleep in the sun. If you don't know what a griffin is, look at the picture. "Up, lazy things," said the Queen, "and take this young lady to see the Mock Turtle, and here is history. I must go back and see after some executions I have ordered." And she walked off, leaving Alice alone with the griffin. Alice did not quite like the look of the creature, but on this whole she thought it would be quite as safe to stay with it as to go after the savage Queen, so she waited. The griffin sat up and rubbed its eyes. Then it watched the Queen till she was out of sight. Then it chuckled. "What fun!" said the griffin, half to itself, half to Alice. "What is the fun?" said Alice. Why, said the Gryphon. It's all her fancy, that. They never executes a nobody, Come on. Everybody says come on here, thought Alice as she went slowly after it. I never was so ordered about in all my life. Never. They had not gone far before they saw the Mock Turtle in the distance sitting sad and lonely on the little ledge of a rock, and as they came nearer, Alice could hear him sighing as if his heart would break. She pitied him deeply. What is his sorrow? She asked the Gryphon, and the Gryphon answered very nearly in the same words as before. It's all his fancy, that. He hasn't got no sorrow, Come on. So they went up to the Mock Turtle, who looked at them with large eyes, full of tears, but said nothing. This here young lady, said the Gryphon, she wants to know your history, she do. I'll tell her it, said the Mock Turtle in a deep, hollow tone. Deep, hollow tone. I'll tell her it, said the Mock Turtle in a deep, hollow tone. Sit down, both of you, and don't speak a word till I've finished. So they sat down, and nobody spoke for some minutes. Alice thought to herself, I don't see how he can ever finish if he doesn't begin. But she waited patiently. Once, said the Mock Turtle at last with a deep sigh, I was a real turtle. These words were followed by a very long silence, broken only by the occasional exclamation of from the Gryphon, and the constant heavy sobbing of the Mock Turtle. Alice was very nearly getting up and saying, Thank you, sir, for your interesting story. But she could not help thinking there must be more to come, so she sat still and said nothing. When we were little, the Mock Turtle went on at last, more calmly though, still sobbing a little now and then. We went to school in the sea. The master was an old turtle. We used to call him Tortoise. Why did you call him Tortoise if he wasn't one? Alice asked. We called him Tortoise because he taught us, said the Mock Turtle angrily. Really, you are very dull. I don't know if she'll stop barking. We'll see. She gets to be on the bed, so we'll see. I apologize for the ears breaking. What happened to this slow story? Why did you call him Tortoise if he wasn't one? Alice. Oh. No, that was what the... We called him Tortoise because he taught us, said the Mock Turtle angrily. Really, you are very dull. You ought to be ashamed of yourself for asking such a simple question, added the Gryphon, and they both sat silent and looked at poor Alice, who felt really ready to sink into the earth. At last, the Gryphon said to the Mock Turtle, Drive on, old fellow. Don't be all day about it. And he went on in these words, Yes, we went to school in the sea, though you mayn't believe it. I never said I didn't, interrupted Alice. You did, said the Mock Turtle. Hold your tongue, added the Gryphon. Before Alice could speak again, the Mock Turtle went on. We had the best of educations, in fact. We went to school every day. I've been to school, a day school too, said Alice. "You needn't be so proud as all that."
"With extras?" asked the Mock Turtle a little anxiously.
"Yes," said Alice. "We learn French and music."
"And washing?"
said the Mock Turtle. "Certainly not," said Alice indignantly.
"Ah, then yours wasn't a really good school," said the Mock Turtle in a tone of great relief. "Now at ours, they all had, at the end of the bill, French music and washing extra."
"You couldn't have wanted it much," said Alice, "living at the bottom of the sea."
"I couldn't afford to learn it," said the Mock Turtle with a sigh. "I only took the regular course."
"What was that?" inquired Alice.
"Reeling and writhering, of course, to begin with," the Mock Turtle replied. "And then the different branches of arithmetic, ambition, distraction, uglification, and desertion."
I never heard of uglification," Alice ventured to say. "What is it?" The Gryphon lifted up both his paws in surprise. "What? Never heard of uglifying?" it exclaimed. "You know what to beautify is, I suppose." "Yes," said Alice doubtfully. "It means to make anything prettier." "Well, then," the Gryphon went on, "if you don't know what to uglify is, you are a simpleton." Alice did not feel encouraged to ask any more questions about it, so she turned to the Mock Turtle and said, "What else had you to learn?"
"Well, there was mystery," the Mock Turtle replied, counting off the subjects on his flappers. "Mystery, ancient and modern, with seography, then drawing. The drawing master was an old conjureel that used to come once a week. He taught us drawing, stretching, and fainting in coils."
"What is that like?" said Alice.
"Well, I can't show it to you myself," the Mock Turtle said. "I'm too stiff, and the Gryphon never learned it."
"Hadn't time," said the Gryphon. "I went to the classics master, though. He was an old crab, he was."
"I never went to him," the Mock Turtle said with a sigh. "He taught laughing and grief, they used to say."
So he did," said the Gryphon, sighing in his turn. So both creatures hid their faces in their paws. "And how many hours a day did you do lessons?" said Alice in a hurry to change the subject.
10 hours the first day," said the Mock Turtle. 9 the next, and so on."
"What a curious plan," exclaimed Alice.
"That's the reason they're called lessons," the Gryphon remarked, "because they lessen from day to day."
This was quite a new idea to Alice, and she thought it over a little before she made the next remark. "Then the 11th day must have been a holiday?"
"Of course it was," said the Mock Turtle.
"And how did you manage on the 12th?" Alice went on eagerly.
"That's enough about lessons," the Gryphon interrupted in a very decided tone. "Tell her something about the games now."
All right, chapter 10, guys. Seems like a good spot. I definitely wanted to have a chance to, chill and finish this up here. Let's see if I can turn that off. Oh, maybe. Bam. Technology. technology, yo. Well, I hope you gremlins are having a great day. Sounds like I need to go give some moral Dapper Banana Mom support. My big 14-year-old is home, and it sounds like Grandma's trying to teach him to mow. So I think he needs a cheering section because he's nervous. It's not just it's a riding lawnmower. So, I mean, him and driving coordination is a little nervous, so that's all. But I'm gonna go cheer Mom, give him support. Grandma wants to pay him. He can have a job. I'm all there for that. Heck yeah. But let's definitely invite the puppy back. Evie, lay down there. You wanna lay down there? I'll give you a treat. Go lay down. Right here. Go lay down. Good girl. Cookie time. Oh, and I heard the little princess too, right on time. So both my kids are ready for some mom time. Time to switch to my main full-time job. Chomp, 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 chomp. Always on the clock. Who's the best puppers? Oh, it's Evie. It's Evie. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. Appreciate the views. Appreciate the follows. Love it. Helps motivate, push me to continue on. I really, had a tough time recovering from the surgery, and using my voice is something I can do while my hand's not really functioning, and this hand's still full carpal tunnel. But don't worry, they'll have matching scars soon. Thank you guys. I appreciate you so much. I hope your day is filled with mushrooms, Cheshire cats, Mad Hatters, and a snail or two. Love you guys. Have a good one. Bye for now.